Welcome to Pastscapes, your place for calming journeys into the past. Tonight, we wander into the ancient heart of Rome, where the towering stone arches of the Colosseum still stand after nearly 2,000 years. Millions of visitors walk across its ancient stones every year, yet very few stop to wonder about what lies beneath their feet. Because under the great arena floor, hidden in darkness and silence, there once stretched a vast labyrinth of tunnels, chambers, lifts, and secret passageways. Places where gladiators once waited, where wild animals paced inside iron cages, where workers moved silently through torch-lit corridors, preparing spectacles that would echo across the empire. And tonight, we're going to explore it all. But before we descend into those hidden tunnels beneath the Colosseum, we must travel much further back to a time when Rome itself was not yet an empire, not yet a city of marble temples and roaring arenas, but simply a quiet settlement beside a slow-moving river. So settle in, allow your breathing to slow, let the noise of the modern world drift gently away, and join me as we explore the entire story of Rome. It was also a stage, and like any great theater, it relied on clever engineering to create dramatic surprises. Hidden beneath the arena floor were dozens of trapdoors, each connected to wooden platforms operated by lifts. These lifts were powered by a system of ropes, pulleys, and counterweights. Teams of workers turned large wooden winches to raise the platforms upward. At the right moment, a trap door would swing open. Suddenly, a gladiator could rise dramatically into the arena, or a wild animal could appear before the crowd. To the spectators above, these sudden arrivals seemed almost magical. But below the floor, everything depended on careful coordination. Signals were given, ropes were pulled, and the machinery creaked slowly into motion. Some historians believe there may have been more than 30 lifts operating beneath the arena at once. The system allowed organizers to create complex spectacles with surprising entrances and dramatic reveals. From the perspective of the audience, the arena floor appeared smooth and simple, but hidden beneath it was an intricate network of beams, platforms, and passageways. The hypogeum itself had two main levels. The upper level contained most of the corridors and staging areas. The lower level included drainage systems and storage rooms. Water management was extremely important. Rainwater from the open arena above had to be carefully channeled away through stone drains. Roman engineers were remarkably skilled at controlling water flow. Many of their drainage systems still function today. Torches along the underground corridors provided light, but the atmosphere remained dim and shadowed. The air carried a mixture of scents, oil from the lamps, dust from the stone walls, and occasionally the sharp smell of animals waiting in their cages. Yet despite the darkness, the hypogeum was never completely silent. Footsteps echoed along the stone floors, chains rattled gently, wooden beams creaked as the lifting mechanisms moved slowly. Every sound reminded those waiting below that the arena above was alive with activity. Sometimes, gladiators stood quietly beside the entrance tunnels leading upward. They could hear the crowd reacting to earlier contests, cheers rising, gasps spreading through the seats. Moments later, a guard might appear and signal that it was their turn. Then the fighters would walk slowly toward the lift or gate that would carry them into the light. For many gladiators, this journey from the darkness of the hypogeum to the brightness of the arena was one of the most intense moments of their lives. The underground passages held not only tension, but also stories. Stories of courage, stories of survival, stories of men who faced uncertain futures beneath the stone arches of Rome's greatest arena. Some gladiators became famous across the empire. Crowds remembered their names. Statues were sometimes raised in their honor. Yet most fighters remained anonymous figures in history. Their footsteps faded into the dust of the tunnels long ago. Today, archaeologists studying the hypogeum can still walk through parts of these ancient corridors. Stone walls remain. The outlines of animal cages can still be seen. Grooves in the floor mark where wooden machinery once operated. Standing there now, the tunnels feel quiet, peaceful even. Sunlight filters gently down through openings above. Visitors walk slowly along guided pathways, and it is easy to imagine the past lingering softly within the stones. If you were standing there in the present day, you might pause for a moment and listen carefully. The sounds of modern Rome drift faintly in the distance, cars moving along nearby streets, voices of tourists exploring the ancient monument. Yet beneath those modern sounds, the hypogeum still carries echoes of its long history. Echoes of footsteps, of whispered conversations, of the hidden preparations that once made the Colosseum come alive. But the tunnels beneath the arena were only part of the story, because above them, in the bright open space of the arena floor, gladiators faced one another before enormous crowds. Their battles would become some of the most famous spectacles of the Roman world. And among many gladiators who lived and fought during those centuries, one name would become legendary, a fighter whose story still captures the imagination today. His name was Spartacus. But Spartacus was not remembered simply for fighting in the arena. He became famous for something far more remarkable, a rebellion. A struggle for freedom that challenged the power of Rome itself. And that story, filled with courage and determination, is where our journey will travel next. So as the torches in the hypogeum flicker softly against the ancient stone, and the sounds of the arena echo faintly above, we continue forward into the lives of the gladiators themselves. The men who stood in the center of the Colosseum, facing the roar of thousands beneath the Roman sky. High above, the crowds of Rome once filled the towering seats of the Colosseum with excitement. From the outside, the amphitheater looked like a monument of bright stone and open sky. Sunlight streamed through its arches, illuminating rows of spectators dressed in tunics of white, red, and deep blue. But beneath that bright arena floor existed another world entirely, a world hidden from the audience, a place of shadows and quiet preparation. This underground network was known as the hypogeum. The word itself came from Greek and simply meant underground. Yet the hypogeum was far more than a simple basement beneath the arena. It was a complex maze of corridors, chambers, storage rooms, and mechanical devices that made the spectacles of the Colosseum possible. Imagine yourself descending slowly down a narrow stone staircase. The roar of the crowd above fades with every step. The bright sunlight disappears behind you. Cool air rises from the depths. Soon, you reach the underground passageways, where torches flicker gently against rough stone walls. Shadows stretch across the floor as workers move quietly through the corridors. The hypogeum was divided into long hallways running beneath the arena floor. Along these hallways were rows of small chambers. Some were storage rooms filled with wooden equipment, ropes, and stage props. Others were holding cells for animals brought from distant lands. Roman spectacles were famous for their variety of exotic creatures. Lions from North Africa, leopards from desert regions, bears from cold mountain forests. Even elephants sometimes appeared in elaborate displays. These animals were transported across the empire in ships and caravans before arriving in Rome. Once inside the Colosseum, they were kept in strong iron cages deep within the hypogeum. The animals could often hear the distant noise of the crowd above them, the echoing footsteps, the rising excitement of spectators waiting for the next spectacle. Nearby, in separate chambers, gladiators prepared for their moments in the arena. Some sharpened their swords, others quietly adjusted their armor. Leather straps creaked softly as fighters secured their shields. In the dim light of oil lamps, shadows flickered across the walls. These men had trained for years. Many had once been prisoners of war or slaves. Others had volunteered for the dangerous life of a gladiator, hoping to win fame, prize money, or even freedom. Inside the underground passages, the atmosphere was often calm and focused. The noise of the crowd above reached the hypogeum only as a distant rumble, like waves crashing far away on a rocky shore. Workers moved through the tunnels, carrying tools and equipment. Some were responsible for operating the remarkable machinery hidden beneath the arena. Because the Colosseum was not only a place of combat, Vespasian was very different from Nero. He had risen through the ranks of the Roman army and was known for his practical nature and disciplined leadership. When he became emperor, he understood that Rome needed not only stability, but also a powerful symbol of renewal. So he made an extraordinary decision. Instead of keeping Nero's luxurious palace for himself, Vespasian ordered much of it to be dismantled. The private lake at the center of the palace grounds would be drained, and in its place he would build something entirely new, a massive public amphitheater, a place where the people of Rome could gather together, a place for grand spectacles, celebrations, and games. The project would become one of the most ambitious construction efforts in Roman history. Thousands of workers were brought to the site. Stonecutters, engineers, architects, and laborers arrived from across the empire. The ground where Nero's lake had once shimmered was carefully filled and stabilized with layers of stone and concrete. Roman builders were masters of engineering. They used a special mixture of lime, volcanic ash, and water to create an early form of concrete that hardened into incredibly strong material. Slowly, the foundations of the great amphitheater began to rise, block by block, arch by arch. The structure was built using enormous limestone stones transported from quarries miles away. These stones were fitted together with remarkable precision. Instead of using mortar between the blocks, Roman builders often secured them with iron clamps hidden inside the stone. The design of the amphitheater was both elegant and practical. Its shape was oval, allowing tens of thousands of spectators to view the arena clearly from every angle. 4 levels of seating rose upward in carefully arranged rows. Wide staircases and corridors allowed crowds to enter and exit quickly. Large arches formed the outer walls, creating a graceful pattern of repeating curves that wrapped around the entire structure. When construction was complete, the amphitheater would stand nearly 50 meters tall. It could hold more than 50,000 spectators. The building was so vast that it dominated the skyline of Rome. Although today we call it the Colosseum, ancient Romans originally referred to it as the Flavian Amphitheater, honoring the ruling Flavian dynasty of emperors. Construction began around the year 70 AD, but Vespasian would not live to see the final completion of his grand project. After several years of work, the responsibility for finishing the amphitheater passed to his son. The new emperor was Titus. Titus continued his father's vision and oversaw the final stages of construction. In the year 80 AD, the amphitheater was ready. To celebrate its opening, Titus organized a festival of games and spectacles that lasted for 100 days. For over 3 months, the citizens of Rome filled the enormous arena. Crowds arrived early in the morning and stayed until the evening sky turned deep shades of orange and purple. Inside the arena, a variety of spectacles took place: gladiator contests, animal hunts, dramatic reenactments of famous battles. Some ancient accounts even describe temporary water displays that simulated naval battles. For the people of Rome, the Colosseum was more than just a place of entertainment. It was a symbol, a reminder that the emperor had given the city something magnificent, a public monument built not for private luxury, but for the enjoyment of the people. Yet even as spectators cheered above the arena, there was another world hidden beneath their feet. A shadowy labyrinth of chambers and corridors, a place filled with quiet preparation and anticipation. Below the arena floor stretched an underground network known as the Hypogeum. Here, animals were kept in cages. Gladiators waited for their turn to enter the arena. Workers operated lifts and trapdoors that could suddenly reveal surprises to the crowd above. From the bright sunlight of the arena to the dim torchlight of the tunnels below, the Colosseum was a masterpiece of engineering and spectacle. But the true story of those underground passages is perhaps the most fascinating of all, because within those narrow corridors, countless moments unfolded. Moments of fear, of courage, of quiet determination before stepping into the arena. And it is there, beneath the great stone arches of the Colosseum, that our journey will travel next. Into the mysterious underground world where the hidden machinery of Rome's greatest spectacles came to life. So, as night slowly settles over ancient Rome and the crowds above fade into silence, we now descend the stone stairways, down into the cool darkness beneath the arena floor, toward the hidden labyrinth known as the Hypogeum, and the secrets it still holds.
By the middle of the 1st century AD, the city of Rome had become one of the largest and most impressive cities in the ancient world. Its streets were busy from dawn until late evening. Merchants arranged colorful goods across wooden stalls. Bakers carried trays of warm bread through narrow alleys. Soldiers marched along stone roads polished smooth by generations of footsteps. Marble temples gleamed in the sunlight, and tall columns lined the great public squares. Yet Rome had recently passed through a difficult and uncertain time. Only a few years earlier, the empire had been ruled by a controversial emperor named Nero. Nero's reign was dramatic and often troubled. Ancient historians described him as a ruler who loved luxury, music, and grand displays of wealth. One of the most famous events during his rule was the devastating Great Fire of Rome. For several days, flames spread through large parts of the city. Smoke filled the sky. Entire neighborhoods of wooden homes burned, leaving thousands of people without shelter. After the fire was finally extinguished, Nero began constructing an enormous palace complex for himself. This palace was known as the Domus Aurea, meaning the Golden House. It was unlike anything Rome had ever seen. Inside were lavish halls decorated with gold leaf, precious stones, and colorful murals painted across high ceilings. Artificial lakes and gardens surrounded the palace grounds. One of these lakes occupied a large area in the center of the city. To many Romans, the palace symbolized the excess of Nero's rule. While citizens struggled to rebuild their homes after the fire, the emperor appeared to be creating a private paradise for himself. Eventually, Nero's popularity faded. Rebellions spread across the empire. In 68 AD, his reign came to an end, and a period of political turmoil followed. But soon, a new leader emerged to restore stability. His name was Vespasian.
Among them was a young man named Octavian. He was the adopted son and heir of Caesar. History would later remember him as Augustus. At first, Octavian seemed an unlikely leader. He was young, quiet, and often underestimated by older politicians. But behind his calm appearance was a sharp political mind. Over time, Octavian formed alliances, defeated rivals, and slowly gathered power. The final conflict came against another powerful Roman leader, Mark Antony. Their forces met in a great naval battle near Greece in 31 BCE. The battle ended with Octavian victorious. When he returned to Rome, something remarkable happened. Instead of declaring himself king, Octavian carefully presented his power in a different way. He claimed that the Republic was being restored, but in reality, he now controlled its armies, finances, and government. The Senate gave him a new title, Augustus, meaning the revered one. Though the forms of the Republic still existed, Augustus effectively became Rome's first emperor. Under his rule, a long period of peace began. Historians would later call it the Pax Romana, or Roman peace. For decades, the empire experienced stability. Roads were expanded, trade flourished, new buildings transformed the city of Rome. Augustus famously said he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. Temples gleamed in the sunlight. Public squares grew grander. The population of the city continued to increase. Travelers from across the empire visited Rome, bringing languages, goods, and traditions from distant provinces. Markets filled with spices from the east, silks from Asia, grain shipments from Egypt. The capital of the empire had become one of the largest cities in the ancient world. Yet something interesting happened as the empire grew wealthier. The Roman people began expecting entertainment on an increasingly grand scale. Public spectacles became important events. Chariot races thrilled crowds. Theaters performed dramatic plays. Festivals celebrated victories and honored the gods. Emperors soon realized that these spectacles helped unite the population. They brought citizens together in shared excitement, and they reminded the people of Rome's greatness. But among all the forms of entertainment, one type became especially popular: the gladiatorial games. These contests had originally begun as smaller ceremonies held at funerals for important nobles, but over time they grew into massive public events. Crowds gathered to watch trained fighters face each other in combat. The matches took place inside large arenas where spectators could safely watch from rising rows of stone seats. At first, these arenas were temporary wooden structures, but as the empire flourished, emperors began constructing permanent amphitheaters across their territories. And eventually, one emperor decided that Rome itself deserved the greatest amphitheater the world had ever seen. A structure so vast that tens of thousands of spectators could gather beneath its towering arches. A monument not just to entertainment, but to the power and generosity of the emperor who built it. That emperor would be Vespasian, and the amphitheater he ordered constructed would become the most famous arena in human history, the Colosseum. But before its great stone walls could rise above the city, Rome itself would first pass through a dramatic moment of change. Because the land where the Colosseum would eventually stand once held something very different, a private lake, part of an extravagant palace built by a controversial emperor. And it was the destruction of that palace that made room for the greatest arena Rome had ever seen. But that story begins in our next chapter. And as we continue this peaceful journey through time, you might imagine yourself walking through Rome at twilight, past marble temples and glowing lanterns, while somewhere in the distance, the foundations of the Colosseum are about to be laid. As the Roman Republic continued to grow, the city of Rome slowly transformed from a powerful regional state into something much larger. Its armies marched far beyond the Italian peninsula, across mountains, across seas, across lands filled with unfamiliar languages and customs. Roman soldiers traveled dusty roads under the heat of the Mediterranean sun, carrying their shields and standards across distant territories. Wherever they marched, new cities formed, trade routes expanded, and Roman influence quietly spread. Over time, Rome defeated powerful rivals and gained control of lands surrounding the Mediterranean Sea. Some ancient writers even began calling the Mediterranean Mare Nostrum, meaning our sea. The Republic had grown immensely powerful. But with great power came new challenges. The territories Rome governed were vast. Wealth poured into the city from conquered lands: gold, silver, grain, art, and rare animals from distant regions. Generals returning from successful campaigns often brought enormous fortunes with them. They also brought something else: fame and loyalty from the soldiers who had fought beside them. Gradually, powerful military leaders began gaining influence that rivaled the authority of the Senate. One of the most famous of these leaders was Julius Caesar. Caesar was known throughout Rome as a brilliant commander, an ambitious politician, and a skilled speaker. He came from an old Roman family, though not the wealthiest, but through intelligence, determination, and military success, he rose quickly in Roman society. For many years, Caesar served as a general in the northern regions of Europe. There, he led Roman armies in a series of campaigns that expanded Roman territory deep into lands that are now part of modern France and Belgium. The region was known as Gaul. During these campaigns, Caesar demonstrated remarkable leadership. Roman soldiers admired him. They marched with him through forests, across rivers, and over snowy mountains. Victories followed victories, and with each triumph, Caesar's reputation in Rome grew stronger. Eventually, he returned to the city not just as a general, but as one of the most powerful men in the Roman world. However, not everyone in the Senate welcomed his growing influence. Some senators feared that Caesar might try to take control of the Republic itself. Tensions slowly built between Caesar and his political rivals. Finally, in 49 BCE, a dramatic moment arrived. Caesar and his army approached a small river marking the boundary between his military command and the territory controlled directly by Rome. The river was called the Rubicon. According to later historians, Caesar paused briefly at its edge. Crossing it with his army would mean open rebellion against the Senate, but turning back would mean surrendering his power. In the end, Caesar made his decision. He led his soldiers across the river. A civil war followed. Roman fought Roman across the Republic's territories. Cities chose sides. Armies marched through familiar lands. But Caesar's forces eventually emerged victorious. When he returned to Rome, he was appointed dictator, a position that gave him nearly unlimited authority. For a time, Caesar began reshaping the Republic. He passed reforms, reorganized government, and introduced improvements to the Roman calendar. That calendar, known as the Julian calendar, would influence the way we measure time even today. Yet, many senators remained uneasy. They feared that Caesar intended to become king, and Rome, after all, had rejected kings centuries earlier. So, in 44 BCE, a group of senators formed a secret plan. On a spring day in March, Caesar entered a Senate meeting held inside the theater of Pompeii. The room was filled with familiar faces, men he had worked with for years, but suddenly the meeting turned violent. Several conspirators surrounded Caesar and attacked him. Within moments, the most powerful man in Rome lay dying at the foot of a statue. The event became known as the assassination of Julius Caesar. News of the assassination spread quickly through Rome. Citizens filled the streets in shock and confusion. Many feared that chaos would follow. And indeed, the Republic soon entered another period of civil war. Several leaders competed for power.
Time for deliberation is over. We must
Rome's armies were disciplined and determined. Soldiers trained together in tight formations, learning to move like a single unit across the battlefield. They carried large shields and short swords, advancing steadily against their enemies. But Rome did not only conquer with weapons, it also built alliances. Cities that joined Rome often received protection, trade opportunities, and sometimes even Roman citizenship. This network of partnerships slowly expanded Roman influence across the Italian peninsula. Roads were built connecting distant towns to the capital. Stone bridges crossed rivers. Fortified outposts protected trade routes. Travelers moving along these roads could see the signs of Rome's growing presence everywhere. Milestones marked distances. Military camps stood beside hills and rivers, and small villages slowly transformed into busy market towns. Back in Rome itself, the city was becoming more crowded. New neighborhoods spread across the hills. Markets grew larger. Temples dedicated to the Roman gods appeared throughout the city. These temples were places of quiet reverence, where priests offered sacrifices and citizens prayed for good harvests, safe journeys, and victory in war. Yet, even as Rome grew stronger, its path forward was rarely peaceful. Rival cities challenged its authority. Neighboring tribes fought against Roman expansion. Wars came and went like distant storms. But with each generation, Rome's territory expanded. Its armies marched farther. Its roads stretched longer. Its influence reached new lands across Italy. And with growing power came growing wealth. Precious metals, exotic goods, and new ideas flowed into the city. Marble began replacing wood in some buildings. Public works improved daily life. Aqueducts carried fresh water from distant hills into the city. Stone sewers drained the streets and marshes, and the Forum itself transformed from a muddy marketplace into a grand civic center lined with public buildings. Rome was no longer just a village, it was becoming a true city, a city with ambition, a city with confidence. But beyond the Italian peninsula, the wider Mediterranean world was filled with powerful civilizations, and soon Rome would encounter rivals far greater than any it had faced before. Across the sea lay mighty kingdoms, wealthy trading empires, and ancient cultures with long histories of their own. Among them was one particularly powerful rival, a great maritime city whose ships ruled the western Mediterranean. Its name was Carthage. The coming struggle between Rome and Carthage would change history forever. It would test the strength of the Roman Republic, and from that struggle, Rome would emerge not just as a regional power, but as the master of an empire. and as the Republic grew richer and more dominant, the city itself would begin to transform. New monuments would rise, grand architecture would appear, and generations later, one emperor would order the construction of a massive amphitheater designed to entertain the entire city, an arena so vast that tens of thousands of spectators could sit beneath the open sky, the building we now call the Colosseum. But before that monumental structure could ever rise, Rome first had to conquer the world beyond its hills, and that journey would begin with one of the most famous rivalries in ancient history. So, as the streets of Rome grow busier and its armies prepare for distant wars, our story moves forward toward new victories, new leaders, and the dramatic transformation of a republic into an empire. But how did Rome rise from a powerful republic to a civilization ruled by emperors? That is the story waiting in our next chapter. And as we continue this quiet journey through time, you might imagine yourself walking slowly through the ancient forum at dusk, listening to distant voices fade, while the lamps of Rome begin to glow in the evening air. As the centuries slowly passed, the quiet village beside the Tiber River continued to grow. More houses appeared along the hills. Dirt paths widened into busy streets where traders, farmers, and travelers passed each other throughout the day. The air often carried the mixed scents of baking bread, wood smoke, and animals being led to market. Life in early Rome was still simple compared with the great cities that would later rise across the empire. Most homes were modest. Walls were built from mud bricks or rough stone. Roofs were covered with clay tiles that glowed warm orange beneath the Mediterranean sun. Yet something important was changing within the city. Rome was no longer just a cluster of farming communities. It was becoming organized, structured, political. And for many years, Rome was ruled by kings. These early kings governed the city, led its armies, and oversaw religious ceremonies that the people believed kept the favor of the gods. But over time, many Romans began to grow uneasy with the idea of kings holding too much power. According to tradition, the final Roman king was a man named Lucius Tarquinius Superbus. His rule, the Romans later said, was harsh and proud. Stories described him as a leader who ignored the voices of his people and governed only for himself. Eventually, the citizens of Rome decided they had had enough. In the year 509 BCE, the monarchy was overthrown. The king was driven from the city. And in his place, the Romans created something new, something unusual for the ancient world. They formed a republic. Instead of a single ruler, power would now be shared between elected officials and governing councils. Two leaders called consuls would serve as the chief magistrates of the city. Their terms lasted only 1 year, ensuring that no single person could hold power for too long. Advising them was the Senate. The Senate was made up of experienced elders, men from prominent families who debated laws, guided policy, and offered counsel on matters of war and peace. Much of the political life of the young republic unfolded in the busy open space known as the Roman Forum. If you were to walk through the Forum during these early Republican days, you would hear a lively mixture of sounds. Merchants calling out prices for olives and grain, blacksmiths hammering metal tools on anvils, children weaving through the crowds while carrying baskets for their families. And in the center of it all, groups of citizens gathered around speakers discussing the affairs of the city. Politics in Rome was rarely quiet. Debates could last for hours. Voices rose and fell as senators argued over taxes, military campaigns, and new laws. But this lively public life helped shape something important in Roman culture: the belief that the city belonged not just to rulers, but to its people. Of course, not everyone had equal power. In the early Republic, Roman society was divided into two main groups: the patricians, who were wealthy land-owning families with deep political influence, and the plebeians, the ordinary citizens, farmers, craftsmen, merchants, and laborers. At first, the patricians held most of the authority in government, but over time the plebeians demanded a stronger voice. They organized protests and even refused to serve in the army until their rights were expanded. Gradually, the Republic changed. New political offices were created so that plebeians could represent the interests of ordinary citizens. Laws were written down and displayed publicly so that everyone could understand them. This legal code became known as the 12 Tablets. For the first time, the rules of the city were carved into bronze tablets and placed in the forum for all to see. These laws covered everything from property disputes to family rights. They were simple by modern standards, but they formed the foundation of Roman law. And as the Republic strengthened its political structure, it also grew stronger in another way: its military power.
Remus died, and Romulus became the founder and first king of a new settlement. He named the city after himself, Rome. Of course, historians today know that legends are not always literal history, yet the story reflects something deeper. The Romans believed their city was born from struggle, shaped by survival, and destined for greatness. And over time, that belief would become a powerful force. The small settlement on the Palatine Hills slowly grew. More families arrived. More huts appeared along the hillsides. Paths formed between homes. Wooden fences surrounded gardens where vegetables and herbs were grown. The nearby river made trade possible. Boats carrying salt, grain, and pottery passed along the Tiber, stopping at small docks where merchants exchanged goods. Gradually, the scattered villages on several hills began to merge together. The Palatine Hill, the Aventine Hill, and the Capitoline Hill became connected communities. Between them lay a marshy valley. At first, it was muddy and unpleasant, but over time, the Romans drained the water and created an open public space. This place would later become the Roman Forum. In those early centuries, the Forum was simply a gathering place. Farmers sold produce, merchants traded tools and fabrics. Neighbors shared news about harvests, marriages, and disputes. It was the beating heart of the young city. And slowly, Rome began to grow stronger. Walls were built for protection, leaders organized laws, armies were formed to defend the territory. As generations passed, the small settlement beside the Tiber River transformed into something far greater than its founders could have imagined. But the story of Rome was still only beginning, because the quiet village beside the river would soon face wars, political struggles, and dramatic changes that would reshape the city forever. And as Rome grew richer and more powerful, its people would begin constructing monuments on a scale the ancient world had never seen. Temples, palaces, great arenas of stone, structures designed to impress the entire empire. Among them, one building would stand above all others, a massive amphitheater that would become the symbol of Rome itself, the Colosseum. But the story of that legendary arena and the hidden world beneath it would only begin centuries later. And before we reach that moment, Rome must first become a republic, a city governed not by kings, but by its people, a transformation that would shape the destiny of the ancient world. But how did a small settlement of farmers become the center of a growing republic, and what new forces would soon rise within the city's walls? Long before the great stone arches of the Colosseum rose into the Roman sky, before emperors ruled vast territories stretching across continents, before marble temples gleamed beneath the Mediterranean sun, there was only a small cluster of hills beside a winding river. This river was the Tiber River. In ancient times, its waters moved slowly through green valleys and marshy lowlands. The current carried fallen leaves, broken branches, and sometimes small wooden boats drifting gently downstream. Along its banks stood forests of oak and fig trees. Birds nested in the branches above, and the air carried the soft scent of damp soil and wild herbs growing in the shade. It was a peaceful place, quiet, far removed from the thunder of armies and the noise of great cities. If you were standing there nearly 3,000 years ago, you might see thin columns of smoke rising from small huts built on one of the nearby hills.
That hill would later be called the Palatine Hill, but in those early days, it was simply a place where shepherds and farmers lived simple lives. Their homes were made of wood, clay, and straw. Roofs were thatched with reeds gathered from the riverbanks. At sunrise, the villagers would wake to the sound of goats and sheep moving through the grass. Children carried water from the river in clay jars. Fishermen pushed small boats into the current, and farmers walked slowly out toward their fields beyond the hills. Life moved slowly here. Days passed with the steady rhythm of planting crops, tending animals, and repairing homes before winter storms arrived. No one living there could have imagined that this quiet settlement would one day become the center of one of the greatest civilizations in human history. But the Romans themselves told a remarkable story about how their city began. A legend passed down through generations, a tale filled with danger, destiny, and survival. It was the story of two brothers, twin infants abandoned beside the river. Their names were Romulus and Remus. According to the ancient legend, the brothers were the sons of a princess and the god of war, Mars. But a cruel king feared the prophecy that the children might one day overthrow him, so he ordered the infants to be left beside the river to die. The basket carrying them drifted along the waters of the Tiber River, rocking gently in the current until it finally caught in the roots of a fig tree. There, the story says, something extraordinary happened. A wolf discovered the basket. Instead of harming the helpless infants, the animal protected them. The she-wolf allowed the babies to drink milk and kept them warm in her den. Later, a shepherd found the children and raised them as his own. As the boys grew older, they became strong and fearless. Eventually, they decided to build a city near the place where they had been found. But disagreements soon arose about where exactly the city should stand. Romulus favored the Palatine Hill. Remus preferred another nearby hill. What happened next varies depending on the version of the story told by ancient writers. Some say a fight broke out between the brothers. Others say Remus mocked the walls Romulus had begun to build. But in the end, tragedy followed.